Hello, everyone, and welcome to No Man's Podcast, the show where we talk about No Man's Land. And this is the finale, the episode 41, the big end game. That's the name of the arc we're talking about. It's essentially a three-part arc. Then we have an interlude issue, and then an epilogue. And joining you for the last time, most likely, my name is Vincent.
I'm Michael.
Mike.
And we've got the usual squad. And I pretty much explained what we're doing, so I'll let Mike jump right in with Legends of the Dark Knight, number 126.
That's right. Legends 126. We got Dale Eaglesham. And then Damian Scott sharing art duties, and then Greg Rucka and Devin Grayson sharing writing duties. And it's just multiple plots being set up here. We get Montoya being promoted. We get Leslie Tompkins and Alfred finishing up with stuff at the clinic where she gets a new donor. Lex is putting his final things into play. Batman's contacting Lucius Fox with the help of Oracle to set up his power play to make sure Lex doesn't get all the stake in the city. And then also we have Joker putting his final plan into place, which will be to steal all the babies in Gotham. But we don't know that part yet. But like he's choking out Harley and stuff, and it's like still uncomfortable to read because just how abusive he is to her. And the last part of this is Pettit and Huntress getting stir crazy with the kind of slum like police state that they've built for themselves out in their little sect of the city. And then we have the parts with Dick Grayson, Nightwing, and Tim Drake, Robin having their conversation about wanting this to end. This is all supposed to end on January 1st of the new year that Gotham City will officially reopen. But the way these are placed in the books, we already read Robin's exit, so nothing really fully makes sense here. But yep, this is just the issue that sets everything up in Endgame Part 1.
Yeah, and we read Nightwing's exit too, so I guess they're just back here for the finale. But their solo books are gone or split off at this point. It does seem, and Michael and I commented on this in the last few episodes, that we're kind of like at the very end, the last few arcs, they kind of rushed to the end. We had all these plots going and everything like that, and then it's like, ooh, time to end this. Let's do 2 arcs. Yeah, the Joker and Harley moments are pretty, like, they really stand out. It's a little bit different from the show, and I don't know if that's just because it's more static in the comic book format, so you don't have that same kind of element, that same possibility for comedy in the animation. There's a really nice Damian Scott. It's not really a double page splash, but it's a sequence where in kind of columns and rows, Batman is interrogating all of his villains to figure out where the Joker is. And it's basically the exact same dialogue in each one, but it's pretty interesting. I don't have much else to say on this. I thought this was a fine kind of first part of this arc. Do you have anything to add, Michael?
Not really. Fine first part of the arc. Most of my thoughts on this whole arc, I'll probably just say at the end. That 2-page sequence you talked about was great. That was a lot of fun. I think I'm ready to move on to part 2 of this story now.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay. Batman 574, Endgame Part 2, Tender and Mild, and each part of this, it's a different part. Silent Night lyrics, but darker undertone. So this one, we're down to just Greg Rucka writing, no Devin Grayson, and it's just Dale Eaglesham penciling without, I forgot his name, Damian Scott. That's the other guy's name, right? Yep, okay, yeah, it's just Dale Eaglesham penciling this. And with the exception of this very first page, the way the trade is set up without the covers, there's a full page spread from the previous issue that ends the previous issue and one that begins this issue. They're practically identical, except for it's just one of the 2 artists this time. It's the Joker and Harley about to invade Pettit's base, and I like the version of that panel from the previous issue better. With that exception, I like Eaglesham's art on his own better than Eaglesham and Scott. But anyway, this is a very contained issue. It's the middle part of the story. It's the main Batman title, but Batman himself never appears. it's the climax of this whole Huntress Pettit subplot. So Joker and Harley are announcing their attack on his base. All his men and their family were all in here having a forced Christmas meal together, are panicking. Huntress tries to block the door, not let anybody out because she knows it's a trap. Joker's going to kill them all, but Pettit overrules her, and he's the Joker just knows how to push all his buttons, and he's got completely crazy by this point. So he brings his men out to try and snipe at the Joker. They think they've shot and killed the Joker, but it's actually one of his own men dressed as the Joker. And more of these decoy Jokers keep popping out, and Pettit just keeps shooting them down without remorse, without any thought to the fact that they're his own men. Uh, uh, what's his name? There's this officer Foley who's been kind of Huntress's friend and ally in this whole thing. They're like the ones who most obviously realize that Pettit's gone over the edge. Huntress tries to get Foley to. She sends Foley for help, but Pettit just shoots him dead. And this is like the final snapping point for Huntress. He's gone. He's literally straight up murdering his own men. She beats the heck out of him. She seems prepared to kill him, but the Joker shoots him dead, and that's the end of him. And so now it's just Joker, Harley, and all the decoy Jokers are prepared to storm the base, but it's just Huntress standing in the way. And she fights all of them at once in this really well done action sequence for 3 pages, and you can tell she's getting injured throughout this fight, but she's holding them off as best she can all herself. And the Joker himself ends up personally shooting her 3 times, and he's about to execute her by shooting her in the head in this full page spread where she's blood on her face, and it's to be continued in Detective 741. Yeah, I thought this was a really well done middle act. I liked how contained it was, and how, like, on paper, there's not a lot of story that happens in this issue, but it's told in so much detail that it takes up the whole issue, and a lot of it is told without words or with minimal words. Thought there was uh, Huntress is becoming one of my favorite characters in this storyline, and she really stands out in this run to me as one of the MVPs. Like, this is a pretty great moment where she holds off like a dozen Joker goons all herself, and nearly gets killed doing so. So yeah, I like this issue. Might have been the strongest of the issues in this story just on its own, partly because it works the most on its own, I think, even though like the setup is fairly simple. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts on this issue?
Found it particularly brutal with how much violence is ramped up here, and it's pretty scary stuff when shooting his own guys. But other than that, it's fine. And I'm gonna say it's fine for most every single issue here. Nothing special. This is not a great ending. It's very rushed.
I like the cover by Alex Maleev, who does, I think, all the covers in this arc, but it doesn't really have any parallel in the story. The other ones are more metaphorical and such, but this one would really be more fitting for future issues. And yeah, I laughed at the opening to this and the ending to the last one, especially since last one it was Damian Scott and Dale Eaglesham. So I can't say for certain based on the style whether that last page was Scott or Eaglesham. It's all Eaglesham here, so I laugh at the possibility that he had to draw that splash page twice. But because of that, I'm guessing the last one was Scott. But it's funny, and we've seen a little bit of that in No Man's Land. Lots of like recap and issues picking up and recycling some elements. The action scene where Huntress takes on all the goons, and it's almost entirely silent except for maybe like a grunt and some sound effects at the very end. That was the highlight of this issue, and then obviously ends on a pretty big cliffhanger. But otherwise, it's just kind of a middle part. And with that, I'll take us into Detective 741, which is the finale of Endgame. This is another split duties issue, the same as the first one, with Rucka, Grayson, Scott, Eaglesham. Batman and Nightwing show up just in time, so Huntress doesn't get shot in the head. But she got shot a bunch already and is bleeding pretty bad. So she kind of gets a quick acknowledgement from Bruce, which is, that's what started their split in the first place. Even though she was the one in Gotham, doing shit while he was hiding. And then we get the plot moving along. Joker has successfully kidnapped a bunch of babies. And then there's a moment where Dick is very concerned with Huntress's survival. And I'll get to that in the epilogue, which I think is interesting. It makes total sense. Like, obviously your ally just got shot a bunch of times. They're bleeding out. You're dropping them off at the hospital and everything's high stress. But you can kind of read into it potentially. Then everyone meets at Central, where the GCPD headquarters are, and Joker announces the big game. It's basically a treasure hunt with 36 babies across Gotham, and there are all kinds of traps with baby dolls and explosions. While Batman chases down the Joker, who it turns out is actually Harley, everyone else fans out and looks for these babies, and they're all booby traps. They all barely survived and figure it out or are lucky. And it turns out that the babies have been at Central the entire time with Joker. And Essen has gone back there because her radio broke in one of the booby traps. And so she was going to go get a new one because they don't want to cut off communication. Even though sending her without a radio by herself is exactly what they didn't want. And that it turns out, that prediction is correct because she's back there and she sees Joker surrounded by all these babies, and it becomes a standoff. And Joker tosses her a baby that she catches, but then Joker shoots her. It's not entirely clear where, it doesn't matter, in the chest or the head, and she just dies. And there's a very brutal splash page of Sarah on the ground with blood pooling up and just surrounded by these babies like crawling around her and on top of her and like in the blood, with Joker in the foreground with his gun. And I guess that was his end game. Joker walks out the front door and just says, "I surrender." And I guess Montoya and Bullock rushed in to figure out what's inside. And so everyone figures out what happened, and Gordon pistol whips him. And you get another standoff where Gordon is considering whether or not to shoot and kill the Joker, and Batman's like, "Don't kill him." And Gordon just pistol whips him and shoots him in the knee. And there's reference to Killing Joke here with Barbara's crippling, which is obviously by this point continuity for a long time. And what I think is very interesting is that Joker makes a quick James Gordon Jr. reference. He says something like, "Oh, you got a son too. Like, I screwed up your daughter. I killed your wife, and you're on edge. Like, how can I taunt you? Or like, what else could I do next?" Which was interesting because, James Gordon Jr. as a concept goes back at least post-crisis. I don't remember if it was a thing before. Goes back to year one, but then I don't think really ever comes up again until Black Mirror. So it's not like this is teasing something set up to come after this. So that was a very interesting thing to hit on. And then he shoots Joker in the knee, and that's the end of this arc and essentially No Man's Land, except for kind of wrapping some things up and an interlude. How was this conclusion for you guys?
He should have killed the Joker. He should have shot him. He should have killed him.
Well, yeah, but DC is never going to do that.
It's the perfect bow out for him, and then you can get him back in another way. Like, he just murdered your wife in cold blood. Batman wasn't going to stop him either. He even says that. Mortally wounding him in the knee, which is never affected in future storylines. He should be crippled, but he's not. So, like, what's the difference? If you're not going to address that, just kill him.
Yeah, they could have gone for the death of Gwen Stacy moment here, where you had Gwen's death, and then obviously Spider-Man didn't murder Norman Osborn, but then Norman died, and it's totally different. It's not, again, Spider-Man didn't kill him, but you could have gone for that moment, and who knows how long they would let it stick. But if they let it stick for like 4 years, which I'm not sure when the next major Joker arc is anyways, like that could have been fine.
Well, that's the thing. I've always read about how he's not really a factor until the end of No Man's Land. He's been in this whole thing throughout, kind of orchestrating plans. Take him off the board as you build a new Gotham without the Joker, and you could have a lot more interesting status quo going into that than killing Essen. Because what is Essen? Killing Essen doesn't do anything for you. You just took a good supporting character off the board for no reason, for shock value. Yeah. She doesn't even get a good death. Like, it's not even a full panel. Like, it's so over and fast. It's ridiculous. I don't like this at all. Like, I think it's stupid.
I think it works. Yeah. I think it works explosively and dramatically. It's definitely frustrating. I agree there.
Yeah, it works for that, for like the initial shock of it, but like for the long standing going forward, what does it do? It worsens everyone else. Especially with that big debate of, well, shouldn't Batman like just kill the Joker? Like, if there's one villain that should die, yes. This is one of those moments where it's too clear on the line of like, yeah, take him out. And when the line is just that black white, which you're trying to make it as gray as possible, because these are ultimately printed to make money and figure out another way to bring them back later. But like, it's so irreprehensible to just like, you have your moment, take it. I don't get how shooting him in the knee and then never addressing that knee shot again works better than just simply killing him.
Yeah, I thought this conclusion, it's dark, it's disturbing to the point of being a little upsetting, and to me it doesn't honestly, like, I don't honestly entirely see how it fits or makes sense as the logical climax of this couple year long storyline status quo. Like, they haven't really even given Sarah Essen enough material in all these books over the past couple trades for this to really be a death that makes any sense for her character. Like, I still feel like I don't know the character well enough at this point if you're just reading the No Man's Land story. And yeah, the whole should he kill the Joker, shouldn't you? And then they just don't. This is definitely one of the most, to me, like, maddening instances of that, especially this one line Batman has. Like, he says, like, the Joker's got too far this time. Batman's like, we've all gone too far. Really, Batman?
You're shooting him in the knee isn't going too far. It really isn't. And you've already, in the whole span of this, have shown that there's a line between Batman and Gordon and that they have grown apart here. Like, that's one of their moments that they could have really hammered that in with that. Where it's... But, yeah, I don't get it. Especially after he had everyone... And they know that Pettit just murdered everyone else. So you have all those other lives also on it. Like, I don't get it. I think it's so stupid and just pisses me off.
You know what they should have brought up, but they didn't? When Joker shoots Sarah, she's holding a baby. If that happened in real life, there would be concern as to whether or not the baby got hurt, but I don't think it's ever addressed. Like, we don't see, like, an apparently badly injured baby at all in that scene, but like I'm pretty sure canonically, like, oh, the baby's fine, but like, if you fall holding a baby, there should, like, there probably should have been a line like, oh, thankfully none of the babies were hurt, or one of the babies was slightly hurt or something, like,
have been better writing than what we got. I don't get it. Thematically, it works on initial shock because it happened so fast and bang, but other than that, like, it doesn't It doesn't work in the slightest.
Doesn't Gordon retire at least briefly from the police force not long after this?
Yeah,
Like, with how
shot in the back in not long after this, he's going to get shot in the back and officer down and retire, which is the perfect way to signal how. Which then you can have Essen take over as commissioner there, or have her retire. There's so many, or you could have had Essen be the daytime or nighttime captain in Gotham Central, which starts not long after this. So there's so many other areas that you could have touched on with Essen than simply getting rid of her in 2 panels.
So
I was even gonna say, if Gordon had killed the Joker, that could have been like his exit for a while. Like he just quits after that. Like,
all right, how about this? You can have the Joker exit, and then his big story back can be the story in Gotham Central where he's sniping people with a rifle. So, because then no one expects at that time.
So, out of curiosity, I quickly looked. Where does the Joker appear next? And it's like he's in like 3 books the very next month.
That's ridiculous.
He's in a Birds of Prey arc, which is kind of sort of a Batman book. Then, like literally a couple months after this, the big Emperor Joker storyline in the Superman book starts and lasts like half a year. And there's also a couple, like 2 months after this, there's the Joker Mask intercompany crossover miniseries. So it's not like they took Joker off the shelf for a little bit. And I don't even think I don't know how he goes to prison or like how the continuity works, because he literally appears in Birds of Prey the next month for like 3 issues in a row.
After saying this, but if we had the 3 Jokers idea now, you could have just taken one off the board by murdering him here, and then you have still used. Just saying. I hate that I'm now in defense of that, but then there's another way it works.
Yeah, whenever that book's come out. All right, now I'm going to go into this interlude issue, Azrael, Agent of the Bat, number 61, by the usual team of Dennis O'Neil and Roger Robinson. This is basically parallel to the finale. There's lots of recycled scenes and dialogue, which is something that we've seen in previous arcs, and I think particularly prevalent in Azrael, a little bit in Catwoman as well, where like literally the exact same dialogue, the exact same scenes, just different angles because it's a different artist drawing. It's possible they're even passing around the same script pages, like maybe Greg Rucka / Devin Gray, or maybe Rucka and Grayson. Maybe Robinson is going off of their script, or O'Neil tweaked it for different angles and stuff for him. Who knows? But this, once we get past some initial recycling, this is a kind of weird issue, and it's like both very cringy and totally unnecessary, but I also like a lot of elements. Azrael doesn't understand Jesus. That's one of the main themes here. Leslie Tompkins has found a like life-size nativity set it up, and he's like, "What's that?" And we delve into his childhood and his upbringing, and also the parallels within it that he has with Cassandra Cain, Batgirl. And we've seen them paired up a lot, and as they do this more and more and connect the dots, I think they are actually a great pairing. And this issue, possibly more than others, really underlines how they had this similar background and even kind of the similar outlook. Now, there's a moment where she reveals her face to him, and I think this is all actually really well done. Besides maybe the possibility of reading into, like, and especially like there's a little bit more of this as the issue goes on, but like I'm not really sure if John is like hitting on Cass a tiny bit in some of these scenes. Maybe that's me being weird reading into it, but it kind of seems like that at some points, which I think would definitely be inappropriate based on her age, or at the least age difference and such. And then there's like more cringe moments where Azrael is given they're given presents by Oracle, and Azrael's like, "Oracle, excuse me, but can you explain Christmas gifts?" And Oracle gave Cass some perfume, and again, it's another thing where it's like, how do you read into this? How do you read an exclamation point and a close up in a comic book where there's no sound? But Cass gets the perfume, and Azrael, like, it seems like he shouts, "She already smells good." It's like, I don't care, what the tone of that is. It's a very weird panel, and things just get even more bizarre because Azrael's gift was a harmonica, and they're walking to go do their next thing to meet up with the rest of the crew for their mission. And he plays his harmonica, and Cass does like this like acrobatic dance scene while he shittily plays the harmonica and says that he's not taking Bob Dylan's job. And then when they finally show up, really, besides everything I just said, the only non-recycled part is they fight Santa Claus and some goons who have nothing to do with the Joker plotline. They're people that work for Lex and Mercy. And they just beat up Santa Claus real quick. And then more recycled scenes of exactly what we saw from their perspective in the previous issue. And then kind of the epilogue for these two characters is he took the brunt of one of those booby-trapped explosions. He's all bandaged up in Tompkins Hospital. And I guess, when this Christmas tree blew up, he caught a angel tree topper, and he gives that to Batgirl as her Christmas gift. And this issue is really not at all needed. The duplication, which is like at least 1/3 of the entire issue, is very annoying. And there's even some very strange cringe in this, at least the way I read it. But otherwise, there are some small nuggets of some really solid character and kind of relationship moments in this issue that I really like. And I think O'Neill, well, I'll say Roger Robinson, I think is a very, very competent artist. And we've mostly lauded him on this title.
The most consistent artist across the board in this entire podcast. So he gets the MVP medal, I think.
Were you guys happy that you read this tie-in thing?
It's arguably the best tie-in of the entire thing. Like the whole way through, I think Azrael's the most consistent and best book across the board.
Yeah. It was kind of odd. I don't know. This was odd, and it's hard to figure out, where you should really read this. I think where we put it, the way we're talking about it on the show here, is the best spot.
And the
Because
book,
again, it's parallel.
Endgame starts, so it's almost like an interlude.
Yeah, and like chronologically, you could argue for that, but then it also kind of spoils things.
Yeah.
So I think, as with most tie-ins, this is usually how you should do it. Is you should read the tie-ins after main stories, or just don't publish the tie-ins.
That also works. I mean, if you dissecting this, you only really get about 5 extra pages of stuff that you didn't know happened.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on Azrael before we move to the epilogue?
Moment of silence for his flowing blonde hair, another casualty of this event. It got burned off in that explosion, if you pay attention. And I just Googled the cover of Azrael 62, and it looks like his hair is much shorter suddenly there, but he's in the same costume. So yeah, I think he got most of his hair burned off. That explosion actually sticks for a bit.
Yeah, I didn't connect that, and it is very bizarre to lose your hair in an explosion. But I think you're technically right.
Well, he caught on fire, so it burned his hair off.
Yeah, well, he's not like bald the next issue. I think it's possible, it got screwed up, and then Leslie Tompkins is like, all right, let me give you a cut real quick. Otherwise, you're going to look real damn stupid. Okay. Now let's go to the finale.
All right. Shadow of the Bat, number 94. It's the Endgame epilogue. I'll sing so that, famous song, because this is on New Year's Day. And like the opener, this is wrapping up all the plots. We got Bruce not going to this philanthropic function with Lex Luthor trying to laud over everyone that he saved the city, but he gives Lucius Fox the necessary packet information to show. Basically, it's blackmail to show that everything that Lex has done is not for philanthropy. It's for him to get a controlling stake in Gotham like he has in Metropolis. and he knows that the minute that Lucius shows this to Lex, he'll have him killed before he can exit the door. So he just puts on his Batman suit to save him. We have Barbara and Gordon going to the ball and seeing Bruce there, but then Gordon just kind of leaves. We get a shot of the cops raising a glass to Essen, and the rest of this is Batman fighting Lex and stopping them from killing Lucius. Dick and Tim are talking about what they're going to do for New Year's, and Tim insinuates that he's going to go see Barbara because he thinks he's with her. Actually, he goes to Tompkins's clinic and goes sees Huntress, and this whole relationship is so far left field that you need another hour to discuss how just completely left field and random it is. I don't get it at all. It's very, very forced with the way it turns out. And we close with Gordon with the toasting a glass of champagne to Essen's grave while Batman does the same, or while he lays roses at the Wayne family grave as Gotham's ready to begin the new Gotham era. Pretty rushed finale. I've said the whole time, not great. It's kind of bland, to be honest. This is, I don't know, like, I've seen better work from Greg Rucka, who wrote this, and then Pablo Rayamundi's art it's fine. Like, it's an epilogue. It's not great. It's not bad. Just kind of how I feel about No Man's Land as a whole.
Yeah, this had some weird things. I mean, the whole Lex Luthor element has been built up over kind of the last quarter or less of No Man's Land, and it feels like it's wrapped up pretty quickly here. And I don't really know where it goes from here. I guess, Lucius showing him that, and then Bruce beating up, Mercy and threatening him. I guess it's just over. I'm not certain where Lex goes from here, because I kind of thought, and I think it's still the case, but not fully at this point.
Batman told him you can be in Metropolis by 3 a.m. So I'm assuming he made sure he went back to Metropolis.
But I'm saying I always, and this may be me misremembering, I thought that Lex's kind of entry point, well, his kind of swooping in to quote unquote publicly fix No Man's Land, I thought that was always tied in as kind of part of his campaign platform running for president. But I may be misremembering that, or maybe the little that he did, even though he didn't fully go through, was still enough. Or maybe, I'm sure he goes to Metropolis right after this conversation, but, maybe he still has some legitimate business holdings, and maybe he continues to be a minor element in the Bat books, like during the new Gotham era. I'm not really sure. And then, this whole Dick Grayson thing is so random and forced, because like way earlier we got hints to Dick and Helena having a past, because that was a thing in, I don't know, I don't even remember when that is. I think it's like early in his, it's early in his, but I mean like what it's even teasing from. I think it's early in his solo series maybe. But that was in the past, and there's been no setup moving towards that really at all, besides like what I mentioned earlier on the show, where I'm like, okay, if you read into this, are they trying to set something up? And I was confused, because when Gordon and Babs show up to the event, you see like a brunette guy, and Gordon is like, go be with your date. So is that Dick, who showed up to say hi to Gordon and Barbara and then run, get in his costume to Helena? Or is that Bruce, who then runs to get in his costume? But I don't think it's Bruce, because I think you see him put on his costume after talking to Lucius before you see that scene.
You do.
And it's hard, and it's entirely pointless, because Bruce and Dick from afar look exactly the same, because all these Wayne boys are, besides Jason. And then Dick, like, they don't even say anything to each other. He just kisses Helena in her hospital bed after zero setup. And the weirdest part is that I don't think this goes anywhere, because I mean it may for a little bit. I had the timing slightly off when I looked this up, and I'll get into this a little bit more later. But Chuck Dixon has a lot more runway on his Nightwing run than I thought. So maybe she comes back up in that, and they delve into that more. But eventually, the run after Chuck Dixon is Devin Grayson, and she's a big fan of Dick and Babs, and sets some of that up in her Nightwing run, which isn't too far from this. And we know that pretty much Dick Babs, I mean, was the prime relationship for both these characters pretty much through, Infinite Crisis or so. And in fact, right before Infinite Crisis, they get engaged, and then they just ignore that. But that's another conversation.
Well, the other thing with that is Huntress Cry for Blood isn't far after this either, and Nightwing shows up in that, and they're not together in that. So
yeah, and yeah, I felt like this epilogue. Besides, I mean, like in terms of plot, it deals with the Lex elements, but I enjoyed the actual finale of Endgame. I think maybe a little bit more than you, Mike, at least. But this epilogue, I felt like it feels pretty disconnected to me, and also even more rushed than Endgame.
oh yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the sour taste is already in my mouth with the way Endgame finishes. So this is just like a middle finger.
And then it doesn't really even it doesn't set anything up to come either, which
No.
I don't think it necessarily has to. And I would possibly complain in a different way if it did a ton of that. But there's no hints of upcoming runs or status quos or anything like that. Besides, I guess the Nightwing stuff that we just were confused and complaining about. And then it just ends on the weird note. I guess it makes I guess there's a thematic element to this, and it makes sense. But it's just like
He finished it all. Like the city's still in ruins. They're
Yeah.
just opening the city again.
Yeah, but then the actual the in issue ending is just Bruce and Gordon going to their graves, and then there's fireworks in the sky for some reason, and then it's just over. And that was No
Yeah.
Man's Land.
Are we supposed to think that Luthor's rebuilt a big chunk of the city by this point? Because there were a couple sequences where we saw some building. It kind of feels like they're acting like everything's mostly fine now, but I feel like the city should still be largely in ruins.
Well, to a certain
the
extent,
status quo's wrapped up too fast.
yeah, it's definitely too fast. But within Endgame, basically in the first issue of Endgame, you have a 1 month time skip because it starts early December, and then we get to Christmas, and then this is New Year's. And I guess, and they talk about how Luthor, Wayne Enterprises, Star Labs, and federal government type of people all were, I guess, somehow going crazy and just pumping investment and workers and effort in those 30 days. And they also say something about, it's not like they've rebuilt everything, but they've set up water within this sector from this point to this point. And, they've rebuilt X amount. And I'm pretty sure the next one of the next runs does deal with a lot more of the buildup and does follow from No Man's Land. But you don't really get any hints of that there. And the status quo is not clear.
Yeah. Luthor sweeping in, helping with the rebuilding, kind of felt like almost a Deus Ex Machina to me this whole time, and then it wasn't even really resolved in any sort of interesting way.
Yeah, it was.
I'm not a fan of how this wrapped up, really.
We even basically made the same comment several episodes ago, because when Luthor first showed up and first started doing things, it seemed like there was a major status quo shift there as well. Because we started seeing people we had electricity and had TVs on and everything like that, and so you kind of had these two major jumps forward at the end.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've kind of touched on it a lot, and we go through and share our thoughts with every episode. But now let's, I guess, talk No Man's Land overall. I'll go first, and I'll try and keep mine pretty quick. I still enjoy it. in fact, I quite enjoy it. I think there are peaks and valleys, and I think sadly almost most of that nature is just based on the length and the sheer scope of it. I think there are moments that I really enjoy, but then there's like arcs. Like there was like some Lady Shiva arc or whatever that I vaguely remember that Larry Hama wrote, and it had nothing to do with anything. And there's just stuff like that. But there are definitely highlights. I like kind of the core moments and then the character moments. I think most of the villains had their shining moments. Penguin was used very well pretty much through the entire thing. I liked how Poison Ivy was used. Killer Croc even had his quick moments. I mean, there were some stinkers, like Mr. Freeze was just pointless and going through his own transition at this moment. Harley, I guess, whatever, introduce her during this, fine, and then she's used pretty much how you'd expect in this early period for the character. And then I enjoy Azrael. I enjoyed the introduction and setup of Cass, and the whole Bat family. It's pretty fun. And Two-Face and Montoya. That's pretty much my standout kind of thread of the entire No Man's Land, and that's the major thing that kind of moves forward in like is referenced in future arcs. But overall, it's a lot more. I think I don't actually know if it's more consistent, but it's stronger than the 90s mega epics from a couple years earlier, like the Spider-Man Clone Saga. I think this is stronger than Nightfall. I'm not sure about Death and Return of Superman. But I enjoyed it, and I think this is, despite how huge it is, I think this is definitely a worthwhile reading for Batman fans.
I disagree with almost everything you said. I preferred reading the Clone Saga to this. I prefer reading Death of Superman, Return of Superman to this. It's so bloated, and just overall, it's boring. Not a lot of great standout moments to like. Even if it's bad, there's no moment for you to remember that, like, oh yeah, that was stupid. There's like everything is just like. Also, it's very much of the time like of continuity. You're like, who's that guy? Like when Gearhead showed up, like we didn't know who that was. The Bane was kind of wasted. Lex was kind of wasted. There's too much Joker. All right, the Poison Ivy stuff's cool, but we don't really get a cap off with her. That'll happen. Then New Gotham stuff with Rucka. Okay, that's fine. You set that up. Penguin was used fine throughout. I liked Two-Face's uses throughout. I like the dividing up. I like the concept. I think the execution is it's too long, it's too bloated, and the constant ever-changing flow of artists and then writers on different books and shuffling. It's not as like comical shuffling as the Clone Saga was, but at least the artists were pretty much the same throughout. At least the writers stayed on their same books. Like when you have Chuck Dixon on like 3 issues here, and then a guy we've never heard of on 2 issues on an arc that's supposed to be pretty good, not pretty good, on pretty long, it just loses its luster very fast. Some stuff, I liked the inclusion of Superman in those issues that we got with him. I liked the Young Justice tie-in, but like other than that, I look at them now. There's 7 Batman books on my shelf that I have no desire to really read again because there's not enough memorable or good stuff to make me want to come back and read it. I'd say the only thing that was actually fantastic top to bottom was that issue where Batman tries to reveal his identity, Gordon. That was the highlight of this. It's the only real 10 out of 10 good issue I would say there is here. The art's not good enough and consistent throughout. The writing's not good enough consistent throughout. And it's too damn long and bloated. We're talking about 7 books. Now, yeah, the Clone Saga is about double the amount of books of that. But at least there's funny and good. At least there's funny moments that are like so bad that's good that you want to laugh at. And coming down to it, we did what, 70 some issues of that show and then 40 some of this. I had more fun doing the other show because at least there was something to talk about. With these issues, it was like, well, I guess that happened and we'll go into the next thing. And like I said, I still maintain the fact that I liked Ben Reilly. And I was getting used to that. I liked him as a character. And when he died, it was kind of a bummer. With this, Sarah Essen dies in a horribly meaningless way. And I like that character. And there was a lot on the board left that you didn't do with her. And no one's ever brought her back, too. Let's keep that in mind. So it was the perfect exit for the Joker for a while, who's so overused in this completely. You can't even get through a Legends or what Batman Chronicles without him popping up somewhere. I just think it's way too overbloated, and I'd gladly read Nightfall before this because I get Nightfall, I get Jim Aparo art, and Dennis O'Neil in some areas, and Chuck Dixon some places, and the writing's better. I get I get Bane being actually used in a well manner, which, let's be honest here, has Bane really ever been used well since Nightfall? Maybe not. But yeah, I just look at this and go, wow, this was a time of fluctuating art, and I don't think, and I think editorial changeover. The best thing about this was that I think Greg Rucka was a guy who was able to come up and cut his teeth in this, and was able to then be kind of one of the spearhead people in the Batman writers' room for a while. Chuck Dixon, this is kind of his bow out because he kind of pretty much sticks to Nightwing after this. But at least we get Devin Grayson, and I like Devin Grayson. I know she's a person who's kind of, flip floppy on whether you like her or not. But yeah, I can't solely go and recommend this unless you're an absolute Batman lover and really want to dive into this. It was kind of a disappointment for me.
Michael, where do you come on that spectrum?
Okay, I agree with some things both of you said. My take might be somewhere in the middle, maybe a little close. Yeah, I'd say my take's probably about halfway through. I did mostly enjoy it at the time. Looking back, I mean, yeah, a lot of it was a little slow, a little boring. It was too long, not greatly paced, and the end was too abrupt, and I wasn't a big fan of how they were. I don't think they executed this concept to its fullest. But overall, I did like a lot of the writing. And there's some good art too. I've read a lot of the. I'm a big Batman fan, but as far as the comics go, like before this, I hadn't read that much of just the ongoing Batman titles. I mostly hit like the big like standalone stories that everybody talks about, like Dark Knight Returns, Year One, Long Halloween. Um, but I managed to rack up quite a bit of those that I'd read, but it was pretty fun, like just kind of sauntering through all the ongoing Batman family titles for a chunk of the late '90s, and the biggest takeaway for me is that it definitely makes me want to read more post-crisis, late '80s, '90s, early 2000s Batman material. Chuck Dixon and Greg Rucka's work jumped out to me as particularly good in here. They're both great at writing the Bat Family characters. Devin Grayson had good stuff in here as well. Danny O'Neil is always good. Like I can definitely tell that this era in general is one that I'll enjoy coming back to. Like Dixon's earlier work on the Bat titles and his solo Nightwing and Robin stuff, and Nightfall I'm looking forward to now. Yeah, it was it was a yeah, so basically like yeah, I definitely would recommend it if you are a big Batman fan. I don't know though, like I'd recommend a lot of other stuff before it, but I'd recommend getting to it eventually, probably.
I mean, we're talking 7 books is a big commitment for a complete story.
It is, yeah. And that's the thing is, I almost hesitate to even call this a story. It was honestly kind of more of a status quo. Like,
yeah, it's a line-wide status quo, but still, like, it's still referred to in the same vein as a story as like Death and Return of Superman, Clone Saga, what have you. But
yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it was quite bloated, not amazingly paced. Um, I definitely liked enough of what I got in here, though, that I'm definitely going to revisit this general era of Batman and the Bat Family. I'm looking forward to reading more of the Nightwing and Robin stuff, even more Azrael. Um, But yeah, I get the feeling that hopefully the rest of that stuff will be better than this. But yeah, it was fine overall. I'd say honestly. Um, yeah, a lot. There were good moments, like the Batman trying to reveal himself to Gordon issue was great. I thought some. I remember there was a good. There was one I liked a lot at the time, and one of the Road to trades, which was had a Paro art. It was Batman trying to convince Bruce trying to convince Congress to help out, and I think I remember that being well done. Um, but yeah, not great, not terrible.
Yeah, there's gems, but you can't really pull them out of context. That's the challenge with how
Yeah.
prominent the status quo is. So that's basically our full thoughts on No Man's Land, and then I'm going to quickly run through kind of where the books go from here, because we're out of this 7-book long status quo, and then what goes next. So Shadow of the Bat is done. It's over. That's the final issue. The last issue we talked about here, they just canceled that book. Batman is taken over by Larry Hama and Scott McDaniel, which is a fairly uneventful and brief run besides the introduction of the classic villain Orca. But eventually,
Orca isn't classic or well known.
But eventually, after that brief run, Ed Brubaker takes over from Hama, and it's not really a monumental run either until it eventually gets to a also not really monumental set of crossovers.
I want to be honest. I like Murder Fugitive more than I like No Man's Land.
Yeah, but well, it's a little
long.
Yeah, it's still relatively long, but it's not as long, so I'm not sure about the comparison. But right off the bat, Detective is taken over by Greg Rucka, and instead of one of the artists that we've seen here, I don't think we saw any of him. The artist on that run for almost all of it is Sean Martinborough, and it's a very striking looking run. There's lots of really interesting stuff with color. I think it would be hard to think of a mainline Batman run that is kind of as unique visually as that. And that run actually deals with some of the aftermath. Mike mentioned there's a Poison Ivy arc in there, which pretty much picks up from elements here. I think there's a Two-Face thing in there. I think Montoya is a prominent supporting cast member. And then eventually, as Mike also mentioned too, Rucka and Brubaker, once they're kind of done with their main Batman stuff, or maybe some of it's parallel, they move to Gotham Central, and Gotham Central has a major arc which kind of picks up on the Two-Face and Montoya elements. And then I mentioned Shadow of the Bat is done, but it's essentially just immediately replaced by Batman Gotham Knights, which is written by Devin Grayson and drawn, at least initially, I think, for most of the run, by Dale Eaglesham. So two of the creators that we've seen on most of the books and in this finale. And Grayson was the first female writer to be an ongoing Batman writer or whatever, which is kind of cool. Legends of the Dark Knight. So from the very beginning, Legends of the Dark Knight, every arc or set of issues was initially it was supposed to be early in Batman's career, and then it was just like random loose continuity tales.
Well, early in his career, or like it was pairing big name creators with big name artists, and the crux of the thing was the name of the story was really bigger than the book itself.
Yeah. But just as crossovers became crazy in the 90s, they would pull it into the crossovers, and it would become just an extra present set book for a while. But the next arc is a flashback Batman and Green Arrow story, so it's back to normal until it's eventually pulled into a crossover again around War Games. Just for a couple of issues. Batman Chronicles lasts just a few more issues, but is mostly done at this point. Though I will note, just for the trivia folks, that issue 21, which is just like one or two issues after the most recent one, for a long time it was notable as Brian Michael Bendis' only DC work, but that's no longer trivia. And with Scott McDaniel moved over to Batman with Larry Hama and eventually Brubaker, Dixon is only halfway through his Nightwing run, and Greg Land returns to the character, which is interesting timing, us talking about it now, because if you follow Crackle Comics, And our weekly show, we've moved over to retro reviews, and we read Greg Land's first take on Nightwing. Robin Dixon is much farther along in his run on that book, but he's still around. And Pete Woods joins as the artist as it enters the Brentwood Academy boarding school era. Asriel kind of continues. I wanted to say limps toward, but I mean, no one talks about this book in any way, so I'm not even going to necessarily judge it that way because we've enjoyed it. But it continues through 100 issues, and eventually Sergio Cariello takes over from Robinson a year or two after where we're at, and eventually it's briefly pulled into the Murderer Fugitive arc for a couple issues. Catwoman, I've discussed that. I would definitely say limps forward about a year further without Jim Ballant, without interesting writers, and it kind of ends. But then Ed Brubaker gets on it initially with Darwin Cook, and that's a very classic Batman family run. And then Cass launches into the first ever self-titled Batgirl book, basically literally right after No Man's Land ends. That lasts around 70 issues with a few creative teams. Ultimately, just 2 actually solid runs at the very start and the very end. And initially, you have the creative team of Kelly Puckett, who we've seen a little bit of, and Damian Scott. And then just while I'm at it, just to finish it, it never touched No Man's Land, and you can argue it's not really a Bat book, but Dixon is also about a third of the way through his Birds of Prey run, which is a pretty good title as well at this point. So I think besides the initial miss on Larry Hama on Batman, coming out of No Man's Land, I would say all the books seem solid.
It's an era that people definitely, I think, love and attribute more than this era.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say No Man's Land, first and foremost, it's really a transitional kind of year or two of status quo, because you get Cassandra Cain set up, and you get a few other changes and everything like that. And it really acts as a way to wipe the slate clean, and you get a lot of creative shift. I mean, as we discussed, Chuck Dixon basically continues on the extended Bat family books for a couple of years in some instances, but he's no longer, at the head chair. And also, I'm not certain kind of when Dennis O'Neil moves out of the main editing positions. I'm not certain on that. It may be after this, but
got to be pretty soon, I think.
Yeah. But he also in terms of writing, is also kind of taking a bit of a back seat. And I guess Alan Grant is out of the picture as well, because he was, he goes back to immediately post-Crisis pretty much, and then through Shadow the Bat was able to continue writing Batman basically, for 15 years. And I think he's pretty much off the board here. He may have a couple of reunion projects like miniseries and annuals and stuff like that, but he's done. So it's really a shift, and it fits well because it's also a shift in decades and centuries,
millenniums.
Yeah, so this was it was a wild ride. And as far as where to see us next, do not expect us next week. Do not expect anytime soon. But if we're really bored at some point, there are a few kind of bonus episodes that we could do, and basically picking up on some of the things I just mentioned. We would be diving a little bit into the Greg Rucka run, a little bit into Batgirl, and then jumping forward to a couple things in Gotham Central and such. But don't be on the lookout for that anytime soon.
Well, we're never going to do it, so.
Yeah. Well, never say never. But check us out on other things. You can always go binge binge Saga the Clone Saga. You can catch the episodes of this show that you missed. Definitely check out Crackle Comics if you're not already on that channel. And stay safe. Bye.